And now we're very pleased to be joined by one of our favorites here, Congressman, Democrat from Harlem, Charlie Rangel. Congressman, thank you very much for a few minutes.
My pleasure.
Friday night, when you turned off the lights and went to bed, didn't you fully expect the next question with Syria wasn't going to be if, but when we did strikes?
I did, but I cannot tell you how pleased I am that the president took a deep breath and recognized that going to war requires the support of the Congress. And so he has done that, and that's the way it should be. And it's unfortunate that so many presidents have violated this constitutional requirement.
Now, regardless of how somebody feels about whether the strikes are justified or not, this same president said he had a red line. And if they crossed it with the use of chemical weapons, they were going to go too far. He said it was not sustainable here if, in effect, they used those weapons, and we had to act. In fact, our credibility, he said, would be at stake here. Now, again, good and decent people can disagree whether or not we should take military strikes, but you'll agree the White House screwed this up. If they didn't want to do this in the first place, or they wanted to go to Congress, they certainly would have communicated differently to both America and the world. Don't you agree?
Let me make it clear, because I'm not assuming that this red line theory is something that has any basis in law or in fact. The fact of the matter is that we all agree that the nation's security has to be challenged. And there's no evidence at all that America, the United States of America, is being threatened by what this madman in Syria is doing. We are dealing with an international problem that demands an international solution. The whole idea that a president can draw a red line and commit our young men and women to be put in harm's way is something that's not even worthy of consideration.
Well, the speaker, the former speaker, Nancy Pelosi, supports the military strikes, as does the House Majority Leader and the current speaker. But I want to read you what Eric Cantor had to say. Quote, America has a compelling national security interest to prevent and respond to the use of weapons of mass destruction, especially by terrorist states such as Syria, and to prevent further instability in a region of vital interest to the United States. To his point, what is the message today to Hezbollah and Iran if the U.S., in their eyes, backs down, if they said they wouldn't tolerate the use of chemical weapons, then later on says, never mind?
You know, you're assuming a language, Richard, that is not in my vocabulary in talking about what will we do if the president backs down. We have to, you don't back down with American lives. This weapon of mass destruction talk, some 10 years ago, we were talking about a limited warfare with Iraq. We have lost 6,500 American lives. These lives come from communities that don't have the economic resources that other people do. This is called the volunteer army. So we're shooting crap with somebody else's lives that have no skin in the game, no sacrifices. 20,000 Americans went in for the limited warfare in Iraq. And those that have returned home battered and bruised are not being taken care of now because of the numbers that are involved. So when we start talking about war, some reporter was talking with me this morning about the weekend, talking about barbecue and war. That's because people don't have any skin in the game, and you can talk about war and drawing red lines. But you have to talk about whose life is going to be put on the line. And I submit to you that if the president and the Congress is prepared to say that we're going into war, since there's no such thing as a limited war, then we ought to have a draft where everybody says that they believe that Syria is a threat in using this poison gas to our national security. And I have to be able to explain this to my constituents. And I want to make it abundantly clear that my constituents are jobless, some are hopeless, they need health care, they need education, they're getting shot by each other, they go into jail, and they got big problems. They have just as much compassion for people's lives as anybody in the world. But the whole idea that America has to go this alone without the Security Council, without the United Nations, without Great Britain, without the Arab League, it just doesn't make sense.
But what if you can promise your constituents, as the White House says and the Secretary of State said numerous times last week, not one American boot will step on Syrian soil, that this is going to be strikes from Tomahawk sitting off the coast. It will not involve American soldiers on the ground in Syria.
I don't doubt their belief that this would happen. But war is war. You don't have a part-time war. That's like being half pregnant. You strike a country, and they do whatever they want to do if they think that it's in their national interest. They can bomb Israel. They can have terrorist attacks. So listen, they believe that they can limit the target. They don't talk to us about limiting the response. And you use the word weapons of mass destruction. Now, nobody ever thought that we would be going after a madman, Saddam Hussein, and then for 10 years, and even today, we have young men and women in harm's way looking for weapons of mass destruction. Do I believe President Bush didn't believe they were there? I believe he thought it was there. But war is war, and you don't say what I thought if you're playing with other people's lives. And that's what we're doing. I really don't think that there's enough discussion on what could happen if we declare war by dropping missiles and bombs on Syria.
But do you think there's a consequence, though, Congressman? But do you think there's a consequence if we don't do anything after we telegraphed we would? Is there a consequence, given some of the lunatics in the Middle East, that they will read this as weakness here, and there'll be other consequences for inaction?
Let me make it clear that if we're talking about an international problem, are you saying that only the United States of America should respond to this threat? I hope you're not. I mean, let's face it, there's something wrong with this picture. If we have a madman like this that's threatening the whole world, well, frankly, he's denying it, but there's enough evidence for me to believe that this guy is mad, he's insane, he's a terrorist, and that something should be done. But is he a threat directly to the people in the United States of America at this point? No. Is he a threat to civilization as we know it? And this whole idea of having rules for war, I'll accept that. So he's violated the reasons that people can use weapons for war. What I'm saying is that the reason the UN was set up is that you take an issue there. We haven't gone there because the Russians and China said they would veto the national security. Let me tell you, black folks never stopped fighting going to the Supreme Court just because we knew they were going to reject the argument. We wanted to make the case that we were right. And so it would appear to me that we would still take it to the Security Council and let Russia and China come forward and give reasons. As a matter of fact, I've never heard Russia making sense to me as relates to our foreign policy. But Putnam said that we should wait to see whether we can find a diplomatic solution to this before we take military action. Now, you have to admit there's been a change in the White House of the urgency. Last weekend it was urgent. Now we wait until September 9th when the Congress gets back. Clearly the president has the authority to call us back immediately. And so we do have time. And we can search for a diplomatic solution. And all of this business about losing credibility because of a red line, let me make it clear. As much as I respect and admire President Obama, too many presidents think that they can determine when we put the military into harm's way. It's not constitutional and it's not moral. So just because the president said that he has decided that there's a red line, which I assume, according to you, it means that we're going to strike and we're going to do something and we're going to teach these people a lesson. My question to you is, who are we? It's not members of Congress. It's not the Harvard and the Yale graduates. It's not Wall Street. Who are we? We are young people who enlisted because they couldn't find any other economic option to serve in the military. They call it the Draft Volunteer Army. And 65 of them are dead because of the limited warfare in Iraq that's lasted for 10 years. Now, I know that the Congress, most of the people, don't have personal experiences with war, and it's not required that they do. But I owe it to my friends who I left in Korea, and those that were captured, and those that survived, and those that died, to say that you better have a war in your hand where Americans believe that the jeopardy and security of this great nation is there, and not say that a president, Republican or Democrat, saw fit to draw a line in the sand and say, if you cross it, we're going to attack you in a war. It just doesn't make sense.
Clearly, Congressman, you're a no vote. My question is, if Assad used chemical weapons again, would you change your mind?
The only thing that would allow me to change my mind, since you've already made up yours, is that whatever he does threatens the security of our great country. A civil war in Syria does not directly affect our country. Indirectly, it does affect the region, especially the Arab countries, especially Israel, especially the civilized nations of the world. Why in the heck do you think we have the United Nations? For us to respond when we have people like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, evil people? Do you find any mandate at all that our country should get rid of every evil person in the world? And if you do, who are you sending to get rid of them? Your son, my son, our grandkids? What are we talking about that if he uses poisonous gases again, will I see fit to declare war on Syria? I don't know how to make it any more clear that I would not only support declaring war, but I would volunteer to do whatever I can if my great country's in jeopardy, its security. And I would like to believe that there would be other people that would be willing to make a sacrifice if our country's security was jeopardized. But I know nobody in their right mind would think whatever this madman does to enemies of his administration, a half a dozen rebels, we don't even know who's involved in trying to overturn this madman, believes that they're going to go tonight thinking about what happens in Syria. They will be going to sleep at night thinking about whether they got to have a job, whether they got to have health care, whether their kids can afford to go to college, whether they can keep their homes and pay rent. That's what America is thinking about, not going to war because of a madman in Syria.
Finally, Congressman, you got any prediction? I mentioned this morning already, you have Speaker Boehner, you have Leader Pelosi, and some others who are now supporting the use of military force. They're doing some whip counts right now. Where do you think the House is on this? There's going to be an intense lobbying effort for the next week or so. Are the votes there in the House to authorize the use of force? What's your gut?
I'd like to answer a question that you didn't ask. If we had a draft and the vote yes meant that somebody's kid would have to go and subject themselves to putting their lives on the line, there would be no vote for any war at all. But since we're talking about the possible jeopardy of president after president submitting our troops, no president since Roosevelt has put our troops in harm's way and come to the Congress and asked for permission to do it. So what members of Congress do in terms of supporting this president or any president, whether it's Panama, Grenada, Kosovo, they feel very comfortable in declaring war without the consent of Congress. I don't see where there's going to be any change in that. And there's not going to be any change with me believing the Constitution is there to be respected. And the lives of Americans should never be jeopardized unless the security of the United States is directly affected.
Clear enough. Congressman Rangel, thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.